Welcome and thanks for joining us for this episode. We're going to be getting more into networking protocols and services. Lots of port numbers, lots of names in this episode, lots of acronyms. And if I'm not mistaken, this is probably where our flashcards are going to come in handy. Is that right?
Most definitely, because at the end of the day, we're going to tell you what a protocol is, and we have a variety. So I think that's, in this episode, there are a variety of common protocols that I want you to be aware of, Sophia wants you to be aware of. And I tell you what, we find them a lot in modern networking, and that's why they're important. But I want you to know that as we go through some of these protocols, these aren't the only protocols that you're going to encounter, but these are kind of like what I say, the fundamental protocols of networking. You're going to see a lot of them, and they form a lot of the basic, functions that we need when we need to communicate across networks, or we need to, maybe connect to resources. So that's what we're going to look at in this episode. And, Sophia, what I was thinking of is how about we step back for a second before we say, here's a laundry list of protocols. We define what a protocol is. Sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. Start with the basics.
All right. So a protocol, right? I want you to think about two people speaking a language, all right? If they're both speaking English or they're both speaking Spanish, French, German on each side, right? We can have a communication, no problem. Why is that? Well, in language, right, it has a set of rules for communication, how those words are structured, how they're pronounced, right? And if you're speaking the same language, well, you shouldn't have too hard of a time understanding those rules. Now, I'm not saying you have to be some collegiate expert. I speak 3 languages, English, bad English, and worse English, right? So the point being is that commonality, right? That structure allows you to form a communication between you and somebody else. Now, I don't speak Spanish. I would love to learn Spanish. It's a beautiful language. We've got a lot of people here at ACI that speak Spanish. And if I was to try to speak to them in their native language, I would be lost, right? I wouldn't be able to communicate. So I would grab somebody wonderful like, maybe Miss Corolla on our team, one of the ACI employees here, and she would be able to translate for me, all right? So I want you to think about that communication and that commonality between the languages as what a protocol brings to us when we need to access a service across the network. A protocol is nothing more than a set of rules that define how a communication is going to happen, all right? But it also defines the type of service that is provided by that protocol, and that's what we're going to look at today. Now, the other thing I want to mention too, and this is where Sophia kind of alluded to, there's a lot of port numbers, right? You're going to find these port numbers that are associated with these protocols that are also called services. And let me just give you, before we ever go to a diagram, if I say DHCP, that is a protocol. That is the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol that we use to make IP addressing in large environments a lot easier, right? It's a protocol that defines the rules for accessing the DHCP service, right? When I communicate with a web server, I need to have the communication structure that web server is speaking so that my operating system knows how to translate that data back up the OSI model and display it to me, right? HTTP, HTTPS, all right? Now, what are the port values? One final thing I wanted to mention here too. What is a port value? A port value, you will hear them say, it's a logical endpoint of a connection. What the heck does that mean? A port is a session identifier. When I have a communication that goes outbound to a web server, that web server needs to know what application on my computer to send it back to. Well, when I'm sending information to the web server is listening out on a logical connection point called a port. It's listening out on port 80 by default. Now, you can change some of these ports, if you will, but we have what are called well-known ports. All right, well-known ports are all these port values. They go from 0 all the way up to 335,536, because zero is included.
Jeez.
You have what's known as a well-known port range, and that's 0 to 1023. And those are where the common protocols sit in. And by the way, this is all by INA. INA, the Internet Assigned Numbering Authority, they're the ones that set these port values. And you can go, and I encourage you, go out to INA and find the port values. I'm going to give you some of the common ones here. But now when that web server responds back to me, that web server isn't only responding to me, it's responding to, potentially thousands of other people. Or what if I connect to the same web server and I've got multiple tabs open with different results going to the same web server? How does it keep track of those connection points, which essentially are other tabs. Those are other HTTP requests that you're sending against that web server. Well, when it sends it back, it sends a port value attached to it, and my computer can identify that as, oh, that goes to this connection. This port value goes to that connection. So there's another port range I want you to be aware of too, and that's 1024 to 49,151. That's the registered port range, right? These are more of guidelines. Your RDP protocol, port 3389, sits within that range, right? These are typically registered as software. But then when you get to that 49,152, all the way up to the 65,535? I got it wrong. 36, but zero count. So it's 65,535 ports. All right. So that 49,192 to 65,535 are what are known as the ephemeral ports, right? These are the ports that don't really, they get reused, right? Those ports are used to determine those endpoints, like for instance, in those browsers. When the connection stops, those ports that are in that last port range, right? Those private ports, they essentially get thrown back in the pool for additional connections. So there's the port range that I want you to be aware of. The port is nothing more than an identifier that identifies that logical endpoint of the connection.
And some of these services we're going to talk about, it looks like they have multiple port numbers listed. And I guess that's because maybe you've got a service on one port and then the secure version of that service on a different port. Is that right?
Couldn't have said it better. That's exactly right. And what I did to make this a little bit easier, you're going to see that some of these can have S behind them. In fact, I say that, and I didn't put it in this one. So let me go ahead and keep myself honest right here on camera. And remember that some of these will have an S before or behind them. And what that does is I went ahead and I kind of shortened the list by saying, hey, that's the secure version. And usually what it means is whatever the protocol is providing, it's an encrypted version of that, right? So let's go ahead and let's start with the first one that I want you to know, right? That's TFTP. That's the Trivial File Transfer Protocol. This is like FTP. I would say, yeah, it's like FTP, but it's trivial. What's the trivial part? Well, it uses UDP. It doesn't have all of the functionality that FTP has. FTP has a wide range file transfer protocol. This is Trivial File Transfer Protocol. Let me give you an example of where we use this. When I worked at New Horizons, Technical Training Institute years ago, one of the things that we would do is we had a bunch of thin clients set up, right? And we had a server, that main server that all of those thin clients would connect to, and they would pull down a config file. That config file would come down to the local thin client, set the session up for that time, but it was done over TFTP. Why? Why would you use an unreliable protocol for something that's a file transfer? Well, because you're doing very, very small files, and speed is of the essence, not reliability. And if I had the reliability, well, then we're going to slow things down. We're going to wait for all those packets to come back, right? That's Trivial File Transfer Protocol. Now, I'm going to throw Sophia some curveballs here. And with the Trivial File Transfer Protocol, do you happen to know what this one might be on, what port this might be on?
I know that the standard file transfer protocol is either port 20 or 21.
You got it.
Is the Trivial File Transfer Protocol anywhere near there, or is it further out?
It is not. And I am so glad you said that, because those of you that might be answering exams in well-lit rooms, answers might need to know that. All right. But if you're in support, right, you can, this is the Google, let's Google this, right? But again, in an exam environment, you'll have to know this. And I'm glad you kind of put it as association with FTP, and the answer is no. It wouldn't be that easy, right?
Right.
So this is port 69. So thank you for trying. But let's go ahead and let's do exactly what you said. Let's just drop down right to the file transfer protocol. Now, remember, this goes over transmission control protocol. It's more robust and it's highly optimized for large file transfers. This has been around since the days of ARPANET. This is an oldie but goodie. All right, and the reason it stays around is because how optimized it is for large file transfers, the command sets that you can throw at it. But here's a problem. When it came out, just like the one below it, it was not as scary of an internet as it is today. So in those early days, they didn't bake in security because there were only about 5 entities even connected to ARPANET back in those days. We had the government and universities, right? And then you had Steve Wozniak hopping up on there and hacking the system across from California. Great story if you get a chance to look it up. It's fun. But they didn't have any security because back in those days, there wasn't anybody on the networks. That day is far long gone. So now what we do, because it is what's known as a clear text protocol, which means, and I know she could do it, if Sophia was on this network and she fired up a wire capture software and I logged into an FTP server, she could see everything that I just typed. However, since we want a little bit of security, right? We want to change that plain text into ciphertext. We do that by adding SSH extension to FTP. Now, what do I mean by that? It's really just an SSH tunnel, right? And I'm going to go ahead and mention SSH out of order. You'll see it's in the next column, but since I'm mentioning it, let's not have you flying blind. SSH is the secure shell. All right. And it allows you to do tunneled encryption between your endpoints so that now let's say the same scenario. Sophia's out there. She's got the auditor's hat on. She's doing a legitimate pen test. Now she can't see the information, right? Because it's encrypted between the endpoints. Now, it is not the port of unencrypted FTP. You had already mentioned those, right? Data goes over port 20, commands port 21, right? Data over commands, I always remember that. That's how I try to remember it. My data is more important than the command, so 20 comes first. If it doesn't work for you, that's okay. But when we say FTP, we actually wrap that in an SSH tunnel, so the port is 22, right? And I want you to know that. SSH, secure shell, you're going to see it's the first one in the next column that's kind of hidden. That is one that we can do encrypted remote connections versus the one that's right below FTP on your screen. That's Telnet. That's the terminal emulation software, and it has been around for a very long time. And what it does is it does exactly what it sounds like. It emulates a terminal that would make a connection into a mainframe. And back in those days, those were really closed systems, so you didn't really worry about encryption back in those days. Today, you do not want to make any remote connection to any device where you have a clear or plain text protocol. So Telnet can be used to test port connections, but past that, I would not be using it to connect to remote devices, being plain text. How about this port? Do you know this port here?
Telnet?
Be right about it. It's 23. Okay. You got it. See? Now, we've kind of already talked about this next one, right? I'm going to go ahead and just open up the whole column so we don't have to do this one by one. We've talked about SSH, right? SSH is the way today you want to make a remote connection into like a connectivity device because it encrypts the communication, and then you can't have people eavesdropping on it, right? It helps to prevent bring down those man-in-the-middle or on-path attacks, as they sometimes call them. Now we've got some other protocols here that I want to talk about. These first two, or the last two in this column, are some of your mail protocols, right? Your email protocols. The oldest one here being the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, and that is for forwarding email. The direction of these protocols, so when it comes to the email, is going to be important, especially if you're in an exam environment, but definitely in a support environment too. You have to make sure that you are using the right protocol. So SMTP goes over port 25. SMTPS, remember we're encrypting SMTP with TLS. That is going to be port 587. Now there's another one, IMAP. IMAP is the Internet Message Access Protocol, and this is one in which you are actually working with your emails up on the message server, up on the email server. This one, the Internet Message Access Protocol, by default is port 143, and then you have your secure, and I did have to write these down in full transparency, and I encourage you to do this as well. Remember, at the end of the day, if you've passed an exam, you can Google this stuff, and especially if you're on support desk, but these really do have to become a thing of the past. You really do have to kind of know them. So IMAP secure, that's going to be port 993. And I want you to be careful with that because I'm going to go into the last column for this table, and we have POP3. That is the Post Office Protocol version 3. I do not know what happened to version 2, but apparently it didn't make the grade. This is one that was kind of like the precursor to IMAP, and this is for receiving email. But it's a little bit different than IMAP in the fact, in those days when you would pull your email down, you pull it to your local hard drive and you would erase it off the server, right? That's why in those days you would connect, like let's say your Outlook client, pull down your emails, and then when you would maybe go home and then try to log back in and all those emails are gone, right? So this is for downloading or receiving email, and POP3 has a port value of 110. The secure POP value, POP3S, is port 995. I'm going to take a little stop right there. Exam alert. Remember, IMAP S, port 993. POP3S, port 995. All right, so Sophia, do you know this next one in here, DNS? I'm pretty sure you're familiar with that protocol.
Domain name service, right?
Absolutely.
And that is 53.
You got it. That's right. 53. Now, this goes over TCP and it goes over to UDP as well. I don't know that that's going to be something for an exam really that you need to worry about, but I do make mention of it only because when two DNS servers talk to each other, right, they're going to use port 53 over TCP because when we're doing things like zone transfers enough, we want to keep those databases safe and we don't want them corrupted. If I'm making a DNS query, like maybe I throw a DNS query against Sophia's server, I'm like, what is www.google.com, right? I'm looking for a name query, but I don't really care about, it being uncorrupted, right? It's a very small packet. So that type of query, when the client queries a DNS server, that's going to be over to UDP because we don't really care about the connection-oriented service. Very good. Next one is DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, kind of like we opened the episode up. Remember, this is the way that we can, I don't want to say automatically because it's not automatic until you set it up, but dynamically, rather than manually going to thousands of computers and statically mapping their IP addresses, we can have them connect to the network, call out and say, hey, who's got an IP address? And if your DHCP server is configured and authorized, it will respond back with an IP package offer options and all that. All right, Sophia, this one's a little tricky because this one has 2 ports.
That's what I thought, because you talked about like FTP and how that has 2 different ports, but they're for different things, right?
Right, absolutely.
So I know it's somewhere in the 60s. I don't know the exact number, and I couldn't tell you what each of the ports does.
All right. Well, I'll tell you, it's 67 and 68, and this is one where I always remember DHCP 68 or 67, 68, Trivial File Transfer Protocol 69 right after that. That is just something I do. It might not help you at all, but that is absolutely right. So remember the 2 port values for them. And like I said, I know it is a lot of flashcard stuff, but we're also talking about what the protocols do and what the services are that they provide behind them. All right, so without further ado, yes, we've got a laundry list of more. Let's go ahead and let's work our way through these. We have what's known as HTTP, that is the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. We also have a secure version of them. The unsecure version is going to be port 80. The secure version is going to be port 443. Be careful, do not confuse that with IMAP's 143. That might be a little bit of an exam alert for you. NTP, that is the Network Time Protocol. When we need to synchronize time across the internet, we have various stratum layers depending on how accurate you want. Some of them you can't connect to because they're like the atomic clocks, like at the United States Naval Observatory and stuff. And then, prioritize lower that closer to you. Now, this one's easy.
Yes, I know this one.
Go ahead,
1,
Sophia.
2, 3.
1, 2, 3, right? So time, it's the 1, 2, 3s of time.
Right, it's like you're counting up the seconds.
Absolutely, and that is exactly how I would remember it too. All right, great. Next one is a management protocol that we use quite often, especially for our connectivity devices. This is the Simple Network Management Protocol, SNMP. Sophia?
It's 2 different ports.
It is.
Right?
That's right.
161?
Yep, we got it. And then 162. Yeah, so you have your management stations that actually offer solicitations and then the clients respond. So it does have 2 different ports there. 161 and 162. Remember, this helps us to manage and monitor our network devices and their health and condition because we definitely want them healthy. All right, so I know laundry list. Without further ado, let's keep going. All right, we have the lightweight directory access protocol. If you're going to work in an Active Directory environment around directory services, you are going to need to know this protocol. If you're in an Active Directory environment, it's one of the protocols we use to query a directory services database. LDAP is a clear text protocol. This goes over port 389. Be careful with that one because the one that is all the way down at the bottom of this list, I'm going to go ahead and mention it now. That's the remote desktop protocol, and it is 389.
Ooh.
Extra 3. Might be a little bit of an exam alert on there. Sometimes with the fact that you are using directory services and you're communicating with them, you do not want anybody to be able to capture that information. So we also have a way to send it over TLS, and that is LDAP Secure. That is port 636. All right. Moving on. All right. Take a deep breath. We don't have too many more, I promise you. All right. So the next one is we kind of mentioned is our we didn't mention syslog. Syslog is it is a long time protocol for logging system events. Actually reporting system events to a centralized syslog server. We use I think it's rsync now, but syslog is still out there and we can still use it. Again, remember, it's just essentially nothing more for a standard messaging language, right? And syslog, honestly, I'm going to ask you for this one. I don't know this one. Do you know this one?
It is 514, but I only know that because I Googled it.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, we do have it in the notes, and that lets me know she knows where to find that information when she's studying. I would take that advice. All right. So RDP is the remote desktop protocol. It is how we make remote connections to Windows machines, and it goes over port 3389. All right. Well, I think we're kind of coming up to the end here. We've got the last one. This is the session initiation protocol.
I don't think I've heard of this one.
Yeah, so when we do voice over IP communications, the session initiation protocol, and one that I didn't put up here because I don't know that it's really relevant, is SDP, session description protocol. These are two voice over IP protocols.
Okay.
SIP uses two different in the registered port range. Remember, that's the 1024 to 49,151. This is going to be 5060. That's one word, 56 or one word number. Let's try that again. I know how numbers work. 5060, one number, and then it's going to be 5061. All right. So remember, this is for the signaling and controlling of, they say multimedia communications, real-time streaming, streams and stuff. A lot of times you'll see SIP communications. If you've ever worked in voice over IP, you'll see a SIP call come in. A lot of times we use it in voice over IP communications. But, there's only one that I noticed I didn't put in the list, and I'm going to go ahead and mention here, and I apologize ahead of time. You need to know SQL, all right? And more so know what it is in the port, right? That's the structured query language. Essentially, it is a language that is how we structure databases. And how we query them is with that structured query language, or SQL. That's going to be port 1433. And I mention that because in networking, you are going to come across databases. And as you progress in your networking career, it is important to understand the languages that we use. It's not all the languages out there. There are this just happens to be a relational database language. There are others, non-relational, but we don't have to worry about that too much. But SQL is definitely, or SQL is something that is very important. So I decided to put it in the list, but I forgot to put it in the table.
There was one other one in the list that I know I've heard of. I'm not really sure what it's for. SMB.
SMB. Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that one. Boy, keeping me honest. That's right. Server message block. Server message block is the file sharing protocol for all Windows environments. So that is a very important one. Thank you for having my back on that one. That's port 445. All right. And we do need to know that. So if I'm going to make a connection to, let's say, a shared folder in a Windows environment, if I ran a packet capture utility, you might not see the application layer stuff, but it would be SMB that we're connecting to. And now that brings up another one, thank you. In non-Windows environments, we're going to be using NFS, the network file system. So another protocol I want you to know about, a couple right there at the end.
Okay, and that's port 445, which is right near HTTPS, which is 443, so don't get that confused, because I definitely would. But I'm glad we were able to kind of go through these and get familiar with the port numbers. I noticed they're all most of them are pretty early in the giant long thousands of ports. But it's good to know some of these more common ones. We won't have time to get into all thousands of them. Thank you for walking us through these, Wes, and thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.